The grand Worthington estate was alive with the hum of an extravagant party, crystal glasses clinking, laughter floating through candlelit halls, and the rustle of silk gowns against polished marble. Lady Worthington, the hostess, had just entertained her guests with stories of her latest travels, her ruby necklace gleaming brilliantly at her throat, a family heirloom said to be cursed by a vengeful Maharaja centuries ago. As the evening waned, she retired to her chambers, carefully locking the necklace away in an ornate jewelry box. The house settled into a restless quiet, the servants moving like shadows to clean up after the festivities. The next morning, a scream shattered the calm. A frantic maid stumbled into the hallway, her face pale. Lady Worthington stood before her open jewelry box, hands trembling. The rubies were gone. The lock showed no signs of violence, yet the necklace had vanished as if spirited away by unseen hands. The household erupted into chaos. The butler, usually unflappable, stammered as he confirmed that no one had entered the room. The guests, still drowsy from the night's revelries, were roused for questioning. The French windows in the hallway had been slightly ajar. Had someone slipped in from the garden? Or was the thief far closer than anyone suspected? The police were summoned, but before they arrived, Lady Worthington's nephew, a sharp-eyed amateur detective, took charge. His gaze lingered on the smallest details, a smudge on the jewelry box, a faint footprint near the window, the way the maid avoided his eyes. The mystery had begun, and the first question loomed. Who could have stolen the ruby necklace without leaving a trace? The scene sets the stage for a classic locked room mystery, blending Gothic atmosphere with the precision of a whodunit. Every detail, the cursed necklace, the untouched lock, the nervous servants, hints at deception, theft, and a secret waiting to be uncovered. The Worthington Ball was the event of the season, an opulent gathering where London's elite shimmered under crystal chandeliers, their jewels rivaling the stars outside. At the center of it all was Lady Eleanor Worthington, resplendent in emerald silk, the famed Worthington rubies glowing like smoldering coals against her throat. The necklace, a relic of British India, was said to carry a dark history. Rumors whispered that its last owner, a colonial officer's wife, had died mysteriously the night she first wore it. As the clock struck midnight, the guests' laughter grew louder, their movements looser with champagne. A minor commotion broke out near the terrace. Miss Clara Fitzroy, a young widow known for her sharp wit and sharper tongue, had knocked over a servant's tray, sending a cascade of claret onto Lady Worthington's gown. Amid the flurry of apologies and napkins, no one noticed the shadow slipping down the hall toward the lady's private chambers. Later, in the stillness of the early hours, Lady Worthington herself secured the rubies in her mahogany jewelry box, the tiny key clicking securely in the lock. She paused, struck by an odd sensation. Had the air in the room shifted? A faint trace of lavender lingered near the vanity. She dismissed it as imagination and retired to bed. Dawn had barely touched the horizon when a shrill cry echoed through the manor. The lady's maid, Betsy, stood frozen in the doorway, her hands pressed to her mouth. The jewelry box sat open, its velvet lining bare. The rubies were gone. The household erupted. The butler, Hastings, a man of unshakable composure, was uncharacteristically flustered as he swore no one had entered. The French doors in the study, however, were slightly ajar, the damp morning air curling through the gap. A single muddy footprint, too small for a man's boot, marred the polished floor. Sir Edmund Blake, Lady Worthington's nephew and a former investigator for the Crown, arrived before the police. His sharp eyes missed nothing. The scratch marks on the lock, too precise for a brute force break-in. The lingering scent of lavender near the window, the way Betsy's hands trembled when she spoke. And then there was the note, slipped beneath the lady's door just as the chaos began. A single line in elegant script. The morning sun cast long, accusing fingers through the stained glass windows of Worthington Manor as a sleek black motor car crunched to a halt on the gravel drive. Out stepped Detective Inspector Alistair Grayson of Scotland Yard, his sharp features set in grim determination, the silver tips of his polished shoes flashing with each purposeful stride toward the house. The servants had been gathered in the grand foyer like frightened birds, their whispers dying the moment Grayson crossed the threshold. His keen eyes immediately took in the scene, the way the butler's fingers twitched at his sides, the maid's red-rimmed eyes avoiding his gaze, the faint smudge of dirt near the base of the grand staircase that no one had bothered to clean in the chaos. Lady Worthington, usually a portrait of aristocratic composure, sat stiffly in the drawing room, her hands clenched around a teacup that had long gone cold. "Inspector," she said, her voice tight, "I trust you understand the sensitivity of this matter. The rubies have been in my family for generations. Their value is incalculable." Grayson gave a curt nod, removing his notebook with deliberate slowness. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." As Lady Worthington recounted the previous evening's events, Grayson's gaze flickered toward the hallway where the theft had occurred. The study door stood ajar, the scene of the crime waiting like an unspoken challenge. His first stop was the jewelry box. Kneeling, he examined the lock with a practiced eye. Tiny, almost imperceptible scratches marred the brass. "Picked," he murmured, "and by someone who knew what they were doing." Then, the window. The latch was loose, the sill bearing the faintest imprint of a glove. Outside, the manicured garden showed no signs of disturbance. No trampled flowers, no broken branches. Whoever had entered or exited had done so with unnatural care. Back inside, the interviews began. The maid, Betsy, stammered through her account, her hands twisting in her apron. The butler, Hastings, was too composed, his answers rehearsed. And then there was Miss Clara Fitzroy, lounging in an armchair with a cigarette between her fingers, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Such a shame about the rubies," she said, blowing a thin stream of smoke toward the ceiling. "Though one might argue they were always more trouble than they were worth." Grayson's pen paused. "And why would you say that, Miss Fitzroy?" She met his gaze, unflinching. "Oh, Inspector, surely you've heard the stories." The air in the room grew heavier, the unspoken history of the necklace settling like dust. Grayson knew then that this was no ordinary theft. The rubies were more than jewels. They were a key, a curse, or perhaps a weapon, and someone in this house had dared to take them. The study was too quiet. Detective Inspector Grayson stood before Lady Worthington's jewelry box, the morning light cutting across its polished surface like a blade. The household had been barred from entering. Only the faint scent of lavender and the lingering tension of disturbed air remained. He ran a gloved finger along the edge of the box, feeling the subtle unevenness where the lock met the wood. This was no brute force burglary. The scratches were delicate, precise, the work of someone who understood the mechanics of deception. Grayson reached into his pocket, producing a small magnifying glass. Through its lens, the marks became a story. A thin blade inserted here, a slight twist there. Professional, confident. But something was wrong. He frowned. The scratches were fresh, yes, but overlaid atop older, fainter ones. This lock had been tampered with before, recently. A floorboard creaked behind him. Hastings, the butler, stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. "You found something, Inspector?" Grayson didn't turn. "Tell me, Hastings, how many people have keys to this box?" A pause. "Only Lady Worthington, and myself in case of emergencies." Grayson's thumb brushed the lock again. The second set of scratches was shallower, hesitant. An amateur's work. 2 different people had tried to open this box, one who knew exactly what they were doing and one who didn't. He straightened. "When was the last time the rubies were worn before last night?" Hastings's gaze flickered toward the window. 3 weeks ago, Lady Worthington attended the opera. And after that? Locked away until last night. Grayson nodded. The first attempt must have happened in those 3 weeks. Someone had tried and failed to steal the rubies before, which meant the thief had returned, better prepared this time. Or perhaps there were 2 thieves. His thoughts were interrupted by a glint of metal near the fireplace, a hairpin, half crushed, as if stepped on in haste. He picked it up. The end was bent at an odd angle, the tip slightly flattened, exactly the right shape to fit into a lock. From the hallway came the rustle of skirts. Miss Fitzroy passed by, her gloved hand brushing the doorframe. She didn't look in, but Grayson caught the faintest hitch in her step as she noticed what he held. The game, it seemed, was far from over. The ballroom had been a symphony of chaos the night of the theft. Crystal glasses clinking, silk gowns whispering across polished floors, laughter bubbling over like champagne fizz. But now, in the cold light of investigation, those same memories took on a darker hue. Detective Inspector Grayson stood near the terrace doors, replaying the scene in his mind. The spilled wine, the flustered servants, Lady Worthington's ruined emerald gown, and at the center of it all, Miss Clara Fitzroy, her gloved hands fluttering in false distress as the crimson stain spread across the fabric like blood. "Oh, my dear Lady Worthington, what a dreadful accident. Too loud, too quick to apologize, too perfectly timed." Grayson's notebook lay open in his palm as he interviewed the footman who had been carrying the tray. The young man's Adam's apple bobbed nervously. "She came out of nowhere, sir. Bumped right into me, almost as if she—" He stopped abruptly. "As if she meant to?" Grayson finished quietly. The footman said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. Across the room, Miss Fitzroy observed them from behind her fan, her expression unreadable. When Grayson approached, she snapped the fan shut with a practiced flick of her wrist. "Really, Inspector? Must you interrogate the staff? The poor boy looks terrified." Grayson studied her. Up close, he noticed what he hadn't before, the slight tension in her smile, the way her left glove was fastened tighter than the right. A glove that, he now recalled, had been conspicuously missing during the commotion. "An interesting choice," he mused, "to wear lavender perfume to a party where the hostess favors rosewater. Distinctive, memorable." Miss Fitzroy's eyes narrowed fractionally. "A woman's scent is her own affair, Inspector. Indeed, just as a woman's movements are." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Tell me, Miss Fitzroy, how long did it take you to reach the powder room after spilling that wine? 5 minutes? 10? A beat of silence. Then her laugh rang out, bright and hollow as a bell. "Oh, you suspect me? How deliciously predictable." She leaned in, her breath warm against his ear. "But while you waste time chasing shadows, the real thief is slipping further away." She swept past him then, leaving behind the faintest trace of lavender, the same scent that had lingered near the jewelry box. Grayson's fingers tightened around the hairpin in his pocket. The distraction hadn't been for the theft. It had been for him. The study's bookshelves loomed like silent sentinels in the afternoon light as Detective Inspector Grayson ran his fingers along their gilded spines. Something about Lady Worthington's account had nagged at him, a passing mention of her late husband's private collection, a phrase uttered with a peculiar tightness around her eyes, his knuckles rapped against wood, hollow. One particular volume, a leather-bound volume of Byron's poems, refused to budge when he tried to pull it free. Instead, it tilted downward with a soft click. The bookshelf swung inward, revealing a hidden compartment no larger than a hat box. The safe inside stood ajar, its door hanging open like a slack jaw. Empty. Grayson crouched, his breath stirring the fine layer of dust on the safe's interior. The scent of lavender clung stubbornly to the cold metal, but more telling was the single strand of dark hair caught in the hinge, too long to belong to any of the male staff. His pulse quickened as his fingers traced 4 parallel scratches near the dial, not from tools, from fingernails. Someone had opened this safe in a hurry. Looking for secrets, Inspector? Miss Fitzroy leaned against the doorframe, her silhouette backlit by the hallway sconces. She held a cigarette in one hand, its smoke curling upward to blend with the dust motes in the air. Grayson didn't turn. This would be an inconvenient time to confess. Her laugh was low, throaty. Oh, I never confess before tea. She stepped closer, her skirts whispering against the floor. Though I will say, you're not the first to find that safe. The admission hung between them, deliberate. A challenge. Grayson stood, brushing dust from his knees. The rubies weren't stolen last night. He watched her face closely. They've been missing for weeks. Last night's performance was just... curtain call. Miss Fitzroy took a slow drag from her cigarette. The ember glowed like a tiny warning light. What an interesting theory. She exhaled smoke toward the empty safe. Pity you can't prove it. As she turned to leave, Grayson caught her wrist. The pulse beneath his fingers raced like a trapped bird. One question, Miss Fitzroy. Why leave the jewelry box open? Why stage a second theft? For the first time, her mask slipped. Just a fraction. Just enough. Because, she said softly, pulling free, some treasures aren't meant to be found. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 3. By the time its echoes faded, she was gone, leaving behind only smoke, lavender, and the dawning realization that the rubies were never the real prize at all. The grandfather clock in Worthington Manor's West Wing struck midnight, its hollow chimes echoing through the empty corridors as Detective Inspector Grayson stood motionless in the butler's pantry. The scent of polished silver and beeswax hung thick in the air, masking something else, the faintest trace of gunpowder. His fingers brushed against the edge of a silver tray, revealing what shouldn't have been there, a single spent match, its blackened tip still warm. Hastings had sworn he'd been inventorying the wine cellar during the critical hour. The staff had corroborated his story, all except the young scullery maid, whose trembling hands had betrayed her when Grayson asked about the broken window in the servants' hall. Now standing in the butler's private quarters, Grayson's lantern light caught the gleam of something metallic beneath the bed. A railway timetable, its edges frayed from nervous handling, showed a circled departure, the 11:15 to Dover, the night of the theft. The same train Lady Worthington's nephew had taken to the continent, but it was the envelope that told the real story. Slipped between the pages of Hastings' ledger, its wax seal bore the unmistakable crest of the Von Cram estate, the same family who had insured the rubies a century ago. Inside, a single sentence in precise script. The debt comes due at midnight. Grayson's blood ran cold, The theft hadn't been about jewels at all. It was a carefully staged message. The creak of the door hinge was his only warning. Hastings stood silhouetted in the doorway, his usually impeccable uniform disheveled, his right hand clutching not the expected candlestick, but a revolver that gleamed dully in the lamplight. "You weren't supposed to find that," the butler said, his voice stripped of its usual decorum. Outside, the wind howled through the manor's ancient eaves as the clock began to strike 12. The study doors burst open with a crash that shook the portraits on the walls. Detective Inspector Grayson stood framed in the doorway, his silhouette sharp against the storm-lit hallway, the revolver in Hastings' hand glinting in the erratic flashes of lightning. The air smelled of gunpowder and rain. "You don't understand what you're interfering with," Hastings hissed, his polished accent fracturing into something rougher, older. His finger trembled against the trigger. "This debt is older than the Queen's reign." Grayson took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving the butler's. The ruby cufflink he'd found earlier burned like a coal in his pocket. "The Von Cram insurance policy," he said quietly. "It was never about protecting the rubies, was it?" A thunderclap shook the windows. In that momentary blindness, Hastings moved, but not toward Grayson, toward the bookshelf, toward the hidden safe. "The rubies were the collateral," Grayson continued, advancing. "For what?" Hastings' laugh was a broken thing. "For a life." He wrenched the Byron volume free. The safe clicked open. Her life. Inside lay not jewels but a yellowed parchment, a contract, signed in blood. Lady Worthington's voice cut through the darkness. "My great-grandmother's." She stood at the study's second door, her face pale as the moon. "The Von Crams always collect." The gun barrel wavered between them. Grayson saw the truth then, in the way Hastings' shoulders slumped, in the lady's trembling hands. This was no theft. This was a reckoning, and the rubies had merely been the bait. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.